Hey guys, Pat here. So I'm gonna review something a little different today, an anime. I know. I don't think I've talked about anime at all on this channel so far. Before we get into it, I'll tell you why. I'm not a big fan anymore. When I was a kid and a teenager, I liked anime a lot, and that was because of the animation most of the time. But as I got older, I just found like a lot of anime was really immature and poorly written, and I didn't think the mangas competed with the stuff I was reading in Western comics, and I don't think a lot of the animation was competing with stuff I was finding in Western animation at the time either. Now that doesn't mean there isn't classic anime. Of course there is. There's all sorts of classic animes. Cowboy Bebop's a great anime. I think the whole '80s era of mech anime is terrific. I mean, just countless. I've watched a lot of the Gundam series. I've seen Dragon Ball, Dragon Ball Z. I've seen that stuff. But I've seen all of Miyazaki's films, and I think they're masterworks. I think they're wonderful. I think Studio Ghibli's wonderful. So I'm not a hater. I like Akira. I like Ghost in the Shell. But for the most part, anime's not my favorite thing. My favorite movies, TV shows, stories aren't typically anime. That's not to knock anime fans, even though I don't really like anime fans or anime culture. But that's beyond the point. That's just personal preference. I'm here to talk about this movie because I really, really liked it. And that means something, because I liked it as a movie. And I think if it had been a live-action film, and this is a compliment, it would have worked just as well. I think if it had been a live-action film and had the exact same story and visuals and everything, it probably would have been just as good of a movie, and that's a total plus for this movie. Because to me, if you make an animated film and it works as a film, like would work as a live-action movie, but you're just doing it in the form of animation, that blows me away. That's like Grave of the Fireflies or something. It's like, wow. Now, I love films that only work in animation, of course, like a Fantasia, but the cool thing about this movie is that the director did a good job of making it feel kind of like an indie film, and then turns it into a blockbuster in a way. But what film are we talking about today? We're talking about Your Name, which is now, as far as I know, the highest grossing anime film of all time. It's made $354 million worldwide. I think that puts it past Spirited Away and stuff. So this film was a huge hit. Huge hit. It did okay over here, and it got great reviews in the States, but people don't realize this film was a gigantic hit in Japan. This was a massive, massive cultural phenomenon, this film. And it's directed by, I don't want to get this guy's name wrong, so correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's Makoto Shinkai. So I could be wrong. I'm not the best with Japanese pronunciations and stuff like that, but Makoto Shinkai, I think, is the director's name. I haven't seen any of his other films. I know about them, and I've seen clips from them, and I've heard good things. I've heard this guy's kind of got a Miyazaki thing about him, and I totally get what people mean when you see this movie. The small town look and the way he draws apartments and stuff like that, or the way the streets look, very reminiscent of Ghibli's work. Totally. But this goes in different directions that separates it from something like Ghibli. I get the comparisons to Miyazaki and Ghibli because he's able to create this sense of emotion that you don't really see outside of someone like Miyazaki. But this guy in this movie, what I really like about what Shinkai does here is that he goes into sci-fi elements and stuff that I really attach myself to. It's almost tough to review this film without spoilers. So I'm going to say, there's going to be a point, I'll probably give you a spoiler warning, and you're going to have to listen, because the stuff I really want to talk about, I have to talk about the stuff that happens in this movie. This movie's been out for months. It was released in theaters with the dub. The DVD's coming out at some point, the Blu-ray. I'm pretty sure you can find it online, but I recommend it. Let me just say right now, I recommend the movie, and let me talk about the things I like before I go into spoiler territory. If you don't know the basic premise, it's these two young people who are switching bodies in this Freaky Friday way, and they don't really explain it to you early on. Like, one character wakes up, and it's a girl and she's grabbing her boobs and acting weird, and then they just cut to the next day and it's her again. And it takes you a little while to figure out that these two are switching bodies, and I actually like that the movie just throws you in. It's one of the better parts of the movie is that he doesn't over-explain these things, he just lets them happen. Now I get into spoilers about what the first, 5 minutes is about, but that'll be for later. So basically, they're switching bodies, and that's the movie for a little bit. It's kind of a comedy indie film in a way. It's got jokes, and then the two of them start communicating and texting and keeping a schedule with each other so they can run each other's lives, basically. Like that way he doesn't freak all of his friends out and she doesn't freak her family out and all that stuff. Because he lives in Japan. I mean, not Japan. He lives in like Tokyo. He lives in like the city, and she lives out in like a farm or some shit. I can't remember the name of the place, but she lives out in like a village or something. So he's a city guy. So they're going back and forth, and he's like, hey, I got to do this tomorrow. Remember this. So they keep in touch. It's a really cool device in the movie. And then the way the film's edited in the first half, it kind of just starts to move really well. I mean, don't get me wrong, I don't think they do an absolute perfect job with the geography of everything and coherence. And the director has even said, Shinkai, he has said that he feels like the film's really incomplete and he needed more time on it. And I get what he means, because despite the jaw-dropping animation and stuff, this film is a little rough around the edges. It really is. You could tell that this was such an ambitious idea, and they had such a dense plot, that they almost needed more time. I think it's great because the emotional scenes overweigh those issues, but there are logic issues, and I'll try to get in that later. But there's things in this movie where I'm like, wait a minute, that doesn't make a lot of sense. There's stuff that doesn't actually make a lot of sense when you go back and think about it. But to the movie's credit, you don't think about it when you're watching it because you're so invested. But I get why Shinkai means. I agree with him. I don't think this is just Japanese humility. I think he's correct that the film isn't really complete totally. It's a little rough. I don't think this is the that's why I don't think the movie's like a 10. I don't think it's a masterpiece, but I still think it's a great movie, and I want to talk about it, and I want to talk about the great things about it. So it's a body switch movie, then it turns into a romance movie, then it turns into something else entirely, and to go further than that would spoil it. And that stuff is what's great about this movie. Then we get this like 2001: A Space Odyssey-esque sequence with animation. That's great, and I think the ending to this movie is just absolutely perfect. The music by Radwimps, I think it's Radwimps, I'm not sure if that's how you say it, terrific. One of my favorite soundtracks the last couple years. I didn't see this movie last year, although it got a release date last year, so I didn't really put it in my top 10 list or say it. So if I do a top 10 list this year at the end of the year, I might include this in my top 10 favorite movies of the year for 2017, and not, even though I know in Japan it was released in 2016. But I didn't see it in 2017. I had a chance to until then. But to summarize, it's got a melancholy to it. It's got a subtlety to it. It's got a lot of heart. It's got a vision to it. The director has a singular vision. He's incredibly talented. It's one of the most original and interesting films I've seen in a long time. The premise that it really has would put J.J. Abrams and Christopher Nolan to shame. It's a really impressive idea, and I think this movie deserves its success. I totally get why. It's a big crowd pleaser. It's just one of those movies you don't see too often, like just an original drama film with bigger ideas that catches on into the zeitgeist and everything like that. I think, like I said, if this had been a live-action film, I think it would have been just as good and done just as well. I think it's just a good freaking movie, and it hits. And it has stuff in it that I particular, for what genres I like and what I like about thematic storytelling and visual storytelling. This film has a few things I think are brilliant. Just little visual clues that go along throughout the movie. It's about details. Movies are about details. And getting the little things right, about getting the little details right so the scenes all work as together. Because if you can tell that the director made every little thing work from scene to scene, then it kind of holds a movie together. And I think Makoto Shinkai did everything right with the details in this movie. When it comes down to the personalities of the two characters, the design of the film, the structure, the pacing, all that I think was exactly right. And even the choice of music, all of that. So that's a high compliment. I'd probably give this film an 8.5 out of 10. Maybe higher if I watch it again. I've only seen it once, so I'm only going off my memory of seeing it that one time. But if I do get a chance to buy the Blu-ray, I'll go back and look at it again. I've never seen the dub. I've just seen the subtitled version. I would like to watch the dub, only for the reason that I'd like to look at the animation more. That's usually what I do with an anime like this. I'll watch the subtitled version first, get the plot and everything. Then I'll watch it a second time with the dub, and I can pay attention to the animation and kind of look at that. Because, I have to look at the subtitles while I'm watching the movie, and I miss things. And this movie has great animation, and I feel like I didn't get to see everything. And that's not to criticize the film, it's just a language gap. I'm not Japanese, I can't speak Japanese. If I was Japanese, that wouldn't be an issue. But I'd like to watch the dub just to see the animation a little bit better. I do that with Miyazaki films all the time. I can just watch Spirited Away because I just want to look at it because I've seen it so many times. I know the plot and dialogue like the back of my hand, so I don't really need to see that. But I want to look at the animation. So just keep that in mind. If you watch this film, there's a lot you need to look for. So it does require multiple viewings, I think. So, great movie. Highly recommended for anime fan. Let's get into spoiler territory, because now I can talk about what I really like with the movie. If you haven't seen this film and you want to see it and you don't want spoilers, don't watch this part of the video. That's simple. Don't bitch to me. I gave you your warning. Spoilers. Okay? So, here's what makes this movie really interesting. Okay, so it starts, and at the beginning of this movie, these two characters, the guy and the girl, the lead characters, let me look up their names. I'm sorry I can't remember. I haven't seen this movie in a while. You gotta understand, I saw this a while. Taki and Mitsuya? I think that's their names? Okay. So, the beginning of the movie, you see them on, like, trains, and they're both saying that they're searching for something, and they don't know what. They're both seeking something. They feel this need to find something, and they don't know what. And then you get this scene, you get a flash of a scene. It's very Inception-like, or it's kind of weird. But you see this girl, like, throw a red ribbon, like a hair ribbon, out to a guy. It says, like, remember me or something, and he grabs it. And that's all you see. And then they both say that, I remember back in the night when we saw this comet. And you see these two, you see this guy when he's a kid, the main character, see this comet flying in the air. Okay? And so you just get those pieces. You know that the two of them saw this comet, and he saw it when he was young. And you know that there has something to do with this ribbon, and that you're not quite sure what the timeline is. What's clever is this is very non-linear and deceptive on purpose, and it's deceptive to give you an emotional payoff in the second half of the movie. Here's the big plot twist of Your Name, which you cannot talk about unless you want to spoil everything. The plot twist in this movie is that the characters, while communicating through cell phone and text stuff, and this is where I think the movie has a big plot hole, because the plot twist is that you find out she's actually living 3 years before his character. So when he goes back into her body, he's 3 years previous, and he's in the future. He's in the future. So when he saw that comet as a kid, she was seeing it at a different timeline. That's a great twist, because you find out not only are they body switching, they're body switching in different times, which is an awesome idea. Here's my issue with it, though. How did he not know that 3 years, that it was timeline, and how they text? Now, here's the explanation the movie tries to give. They forget things the next day. Like, throughout the movie, they forget each other. Like, they can't remember who each other are, what happened. Every time that they go back to their body, they don't remember the previous day. So them texting and keeping in touch with each other is the only way they can remember things, or else they would forget everything and each other. And they say to each other, listen, we're going to forget each other. And they start to fall for each other. And they try to meet up, and they know if they don't meet up or get in contact with each other that they won't remember each other. So that's kind of the movie's explanation, but I still don't get how they ever figure out what date it is, or that there's a time difference. That's kind of confusing to me. It's like, wait a minute, how did you never get aware that it was a different time and different era? I thought that was a little weird. Like I said, this movie's rough around the edges, but they don't remember things, so I'll give the movie that. They don't, and that's part of the emotional stuff. See, that they'll forget the next day, right? So they're trying to remember each other. And then she doesn't show up to meet him at this, like, bridge. I think that's what happens. He wants to meet her at this bridge after a date with the girl that didn't go well, and he's looking for her, and he can't find her. And he's like, where is she? What's going on? And she goes, you're going to see the comet tonight. And he goes, what are you talking about? And then you see the comet come and kill her and her village. You find out that she died 3 years ago. So Taki now, he starts to forget her. He can't remember her because she's dead, and he's no longer getting messages from her, and they're not switching bodies anymore. He thought that she just ignored him and wasn't talking to him anymore. Well, because he has this ribbon, he goes back to that village where she's at, and somehow he travels back in time. They don't really explain this well, but he has this ribbon, and he goes back in time in this 2001 A Space Odyssey sequence. It's like the sequence of 2001 where Dave's going through all the shit. It's a beautiful sequence of animation where he's falling through the sky and stuff, and it seems to imply that he's there when the comet comes, and him seeing the comet. It seems to say that there's this connectivity between him seeing it the same night that it hit her, and he's there that night. So he goes back in time, so he's in her body like 3 years before, and he's trying to warn everyone, like, hey, this comet's going to come kill all of us. We need to get out of here. But nobody's listening to him. So then he goes back, and they finally meet each other in the movie. They finally meet each other, and the ribbon comes out, and you find out that what the origin of the ribbon was. She went to Tokyo at one point to meet him because she loved him. She went to Tokyo to go see him. The thing is that he's in a different timeline. It's 3 years before. He doesn't know who she is. So we find out that part where she throws the thing at him, that was when she went to go meet him. They show the sequence, and he doesn't know who she is. He's like, I don't know who you are. And she's like, you don't know who I am, Taki? And she doesn't realize it's just the 3-year difference. So they start to get separated by people, and she throws her hair ribbon at him, and he grabs onto it. Now, the movie tries to explain that this is the connection. Him having this ribbon is somehow, in a way, how they're able to bond through time, and he can still talk to her. Is what I got from the movie. I think it's because it's visual. That's what I like about the movie. It doesn't give you a full explanation. You have to kind of come to it yourself, but he gives you the visual clues. So now you know him grabbing that visual, him grabbing that thing and having it around his arm ties into all this time travel and this connectivity within the universe and them sharing bodies. It also is a really interesting movie because it kind of eliminates the idea of gender in a sense, and not in a message way, but like, it kind of explores being a guy and a girl without really going into it in a stereotypical way. So after that plot twist, after you find out that she actually went to go see him and he didn't know she was, and she was devastated by this, and then she dies basically, they finally get to see each other. We wait in the whole movie, they finally talk, and they decide that they're not going to remember each other. He tells her, listen, you have to save the village. I can't do it. Nobody wants to listen to me. You're here. You know these people. I don't. So they decide they're going to write each other's names down on their hands. Because if they write each other's names down, then they'll be able to remember each other's names if they disappear. So he writes his name down on her hand, and then she goes to write her name on his hand, and then immediately he's gone from the moment, and like the marker falls, and then he's like, oh crap. So he starts to forget her. He's there, and it's a tragic moment. He can't remember her, and he knows he's forgetting it. And a lot of this, to me, was about nostalgia, memory, how we perceive things as to how they really are, how we regret decisions we make in the past. Is love a universal concept, or is it something that's a series of moments that we overanalyze? There's a lot of things to look at here thematically. I really think this is a very deep film. I think it reminded me a lot of Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, except in a YA anime setting, but it had a lot of the same kind of depth for me about love. So she goes to save the village, and she's running and everything, and she just can't do it. It seems like it's not going to happen. Nobody believes her. Dad's going against her. All of her friends are trying to help. And the second half of this movie is so tense, because now you know that's what makes this movie so clever. The first half is like an indie film body switch movie comedy. The second half is a blockbuster where this chick, it's like a clock, like a clock's running against time to save the day. And you want them to get together, you want them to meet each other, and you don't know what's going to happen. So she falls at one point, and she's starting to forget his name, and she goes to look at her hand to see what his name is. And he didn't write his name, he wrote, I love you. And I know that sounds cheesy, but it's not. It's one of the best beats in the whole movie. It's so, once again, visual. He doesn't have him come out and say, I love you. He doesn't over-explain it. He just writes it on her hand, and then the director lets you feel it when she feels it, when she realizes it. That's good storytelling. That's what I want, right? That's what I talk about with movies all the time, when I bitch about it. It's not complicated. You give the audience enough substance to read into. You leave a lot open. You have good characters. You have comedy. You have emotion. You pace it well. And you let people find things out with the characters. And you let us feel the beats the way you want to. It's storytelling. That's what films are built around, right? It's a visual experience to tell a story. He's using those visuals, a simple one, I love you, and a marker on a hand to tell a goddamn story. More filmmakers need to get this. Less is more. You have this huge apocalyptic blockbuster storyline you can go into with time travel, and he keeps it grounded in the human element. Right? Your name. It's about the name. It's not about all this other stuff going on. So that moment's great, and then you really don't know. So then we cut to the future, and you don't really know what happened. You don't know if she saved the day or not. I think you don't find out, but then you do find out that she survived. Obviously, she doesn't die. So you go back to the beginning scene of the movie where the two of them are traveling on the trains, and they say they're both looking for something and they don't know what. They really can't remember what they're looking for. And the thing is, they can't remember each other because they forgot each other's names, and they forgot everything that happened. Because that's the rule of this movie. That's the rule they apply in here. So I'll go with it. It's the movie's rule. So at the end, they're walking around and they both start to feel something. They're feeling something in the area, and they start to run, and they run around blocks and stuff looking for one another. And then they find each other on this stairwell, and they start to walk up and down. And they're not saying anything to each other. And I can't explain how tense the scene is when you're watching it. You want them to say something to each other. It's killing you. Because you know all the shit they went through, and if they could just remember each other, they could be together. And you know all this shit that happened. I mean, basically because of this happening, this guy saved this girl's life and a bunch of people in this thing. So it brings up all these other theories. Was that his destiny to save this because love had to really happen? The fact that or was this just some random thing that happened in the universe with the ribbon? And then because of that, he's able to go back in time and save these people. It's really fascinating. Unfortunately, they spend a lot of time, I think, to some of the movie's discredit, though, they spend a lot of time on the less interesting characters than they should. I feel like the second half of the movie, I mean, it's depending on how you feel, but I really think that she was a more interesting character than he was in a lot of ways in some points, and she could have got a lot more screen time, but it's kind of like she goes away at some point, and it really feels like the talkie character, the movie's so much about him, and then and I don't know if that was the right. I think there was a balance in the first half, and one of my issues with the movie is that I feel like he kind of dominates it a little bit too much, and then it kind of feels imbalanced with their two perspectives. That's just me, but like I said, it's rough around the edges. A lot of this stuff I'm telling you is great on paper, and it's really smart, but it's not all fleshed out as much as you would like entirely. There's not a lot of logic behind some of this stuff. But like I said, it's emotional. You're getting by because you're into it. You're invested. You want these two to get together at the end of this movie. He has all this stuff happen, and he ends it on such a small moment. Everything ties together. You realize now what the opening was. You realize he tricked you with nonlinear storytelling. Simple stuff. That's why I said Christopher Nolan and J.J. Abrams would love to have this premise. A time travel love story with body switching elements and all that. It's crazy. Okay? And then it turns into a disaster movie. It turns into like a Roland Emmerich disaster movie. But then we get to the very end, and they're just standing there on the stairs, and then they turn around, and there's that moment. It's that moment you're waiting. And then one of them says to the other one, like, hey, what's your name or something? They ask them. And then they end it right there, which is perfect. Because you know what's going to happen after that. He gave you enough to go with, and then you don't need any more than that. You can just go with that, and it ends on the exact right moment. Because, like I said, it's an emotional substance. You know the emotional story, so when you get to that point, there's no reason to go longer than that because you got what you needed. Some other problems I had, though, some weird Japanese stuff, like the opening credits and stuff like that, that's very unique to the films from there. And it's a little odd, and I think it does take a while for this film to get going. It doesn't really get going until, like, the midpoint. But, having said all that, still really recommend it, and hopefully now that you've heard the spoiler section, you get what I like so much about it. And the two lead characters are great, music's great, that plot is awesome. It's got one of the greatest plots. I would not be shocked if an American remake of this movie is going to come out in a few, because it's such a good plot. I mean, it's a great plot for a movie. And, yeah, it's a huge hit. People seem to love it. I don't see too many reviews of it, and it's a little out of the box for my typical shit, but I dig it. It's one of the best animes to come out in years, in a decade. It's one of the best animes to come out. It shows that Japanese animation and film is not dead. There is still visionaries in the art form, and it shows that they still make some of the best films out there, and I think it probably deserved an Oscar nomination for Best Animated Film. I'm not saying it should have won, but it should have probably got an Oscar nomination. And I probably did like it better than Zootopia. But still, it should have got a nom. But what are you going to say? If anything, this shows that Shinkai is now a major name. And I'm more excited about his next film than this film. Because I think now that he's doing this, the film he makes that isn't a little rough, that isn't totally, the one that's the most coherent. And what's crazy about this film is he actually keeps things very coherent with all that going on. There's a lot going on, and it's extremely coherent. So that's a good storyteller, too. But let's just say his next film could be something that really blows us away. I mean, I think this guy could make one of the greatest animated films of all time. But to his credit, this is one of the greatest love stories in an animated film, and it's one of the better modern animated films. And maybe with time, it'll grow with me a little bit more. But to its credit, I do think it's one of the best movies of the last few years, and I really like it. So hopefully you enjoyed this review. Like, comment, and subscribe. Tell me what you think in the comment section, and I'll see you guys next time.